I'm Graeme Davison. I'm the author of My Grandfather's Clock, which is just out now from MUP. Well, the book is really a family story, but it's focused around an heirloom, which is the grandfather clock that I inherited from my great aunt, or through my father from my great aunt. And it was a clock that I thought originally belonged to my great grandfather, but I've discovered now that it actually has been in the family for about 7 generations, right back to the time that it was made at the end of the 18th century. I'd written a previous book about my mother's family, and so people kept asking me, what about my father, rather implying that there might be something disgraceful I was hiding. And I thought, I really should get onto it. And then COVID came along, and it's also a continuation of an exploration that I've really been making, because I'm a general historian, really, and for a long while I rather resisted family history. And then I began to realise more and more that really family is often the window through which many, many people access the past, and that the family history model or family history genre is one that enables us to explore a whole range of questions about how people lived in the past, and in particular how one generation affects another. So it's a search for personal identity for me. But the book is also, I hope, an invitation for other people to think about how their family and their family story connects with the wider society. One thing that I learned was, of course, I'm the first of my generation not to be a manual worker. All my forebears were tradesmen. And interestingly, many of them were tradesmen in similar occupations, metal trades. So my father was a plumber, and his father was an ironmonger, and his father was a tin plate worker, and his father was a bootmaker, and his father was made trousers. Now you would think that some of them are a bit different, but when you think about all of those things, they all involve taking material that first of all appears in sheet form and then stitching it together and polishing it and making it into something else. So they were all tradesmen, and I think my father probably expected me to be a tradesman, and I explain in the book how it became clear, two things really. It was clear that I had no competence whatever with my hands. I was not good with my hands, as my father would have said. And it also became clear that the world was opening up in those years after the Second World War. And I'm a product of that extraordinary period that began after the Second World War, and I think reached into the 1970s, when many people who came from families like mine had an opportunity for higher education, and that was what really shaped my life. So there's a kind of a looking back for me and thinking about how my life connects with what for my forebears was often a rather different kind of life. And there were connecting things. One interesting connecting thing is religion, that we were Methodists from the 19th century and into the early 20th century. And connected with that was also that both my father and my grandfather were teetotallers. They didn't drink. I can't say that I followed them in that respect, but I was interested in the origins of that, and intriguingly, I found it. I went back, and unsurprisingly to me, as I was scanning 19th century newspapers, I suddenly found my great-great-grandfather speaking from the pages of a provincial newspaper in England and explaining why he'd given away the drink. So there were those kind of connecting things in the family story. I write mostly about cities. That's been and there's a lot about cities in this book, but it's also about how people who originally were not city dwellers at all, they came from the countryside, and how they became city dwellers and how it changed their lives. So in order to do it, it was a combination of things. I went back to country, as we might say in Australia. I went back to the Scottish borders, which was where the family legend was that we were reivers, that is bandits from the Scottish border. And I was so intrigued by this possibility. Among other things, I thought how wonderful that some of my forebears might have been a bit wilder than the people that I'd grown up with. And so I went back to the border country in Scotland, and so the research before COVID in 2018, I was able to get back there. And then, of course, a lot of the research these days, you can do it through online. And so it was a COVID project for me. I spent a lot of time researching in sources which now there's a vast array of digital sources, including quite early ones, 16th, 17th century sources, that enabled me to go back and reconstruct the family's life. So many readers will be familiar with sites like Ancestry.com, but there's a range of other sources as well that you've put together with the genealogical sources, which will enable you to flesh out the whole family story. So that's what I set about doing, and I found it absolutely fascinating. One thing that's a bit different is that I try to go deeper. I really did take seriously the challenge of trying to move back beyond the 18th century. Many people who attempt family history will find that the sources, particularly the manuscript census sources and births, marriages and deaths records, take you back with ease to about the beginning of the 19th century, and then it's hard to go further back. So the book is subtitled 4 Centuries of British Australian Families. So I really went right back into the 16th century, and I had the extraordinary experience of looking into the sources and finding no less than figure than Henry VIII writing to the wardens on the Scottish borders and saying, these Davisons are causing a lot of trouble, you better do something about it. So I went right back, and then I went further forward. I went forward into my own parents' lifetime and my own lifetime. So the book actually begins and ends in 1968, the year that my great aunt died, which happens to be the year a year after I married, a year before I had our first child. So I wanted to carry the story into my own lifetime, and that enables me to do a couple of things, I think. I'm not sure that perhaps other writers have done this as well, but I was wanting to be able to reflect about the life that I inherited and how that affected and connected with the life of my forebears. And the book as a whole is also a meditation on the whole process of family history. I really want to try and make self-conscious what it is that people are doing when they look for a family past. And I think it's partly a response to modernity. I think modernity now leaves us in a position where we often feel displaced, or we feel that we have no home. And so that's what drives us. And Australians, by the way, are probably more interested in family history, say, than British people are. And it's partly because the process of migration and movement to another country makes us the quest for our origins seem more urgent. So I really wanted to question myself. So the book is in some ways a kind of an experiment on myself. I'm wanting to test my own reactions to what I find, and then to try and put it in some kind of critical perspective. So I say at one point in the book that when I travel into the countryside looking for my ancestors, I want to take my romanticism and my skepticism with me. I want to kind of keep those things in balance. I hope I hope that they'll enjoy the story. I hope they'll enjoy my story, and I think there's some interesting things about it. But I hope it'll also encourage them to question their own place in the world and where they fit. And that's one of the benefits of family history, is that I think, judging by responses to my previous book, and I hope to this one as well, that many readers will come away thinking, that's a bit like my experience, or maybe it's a bit not like my experience, and why is it so? So that's, I think, the beauty of family history, is that it's a more intimate way of situating ourselves in big history. We go to history to learn about revolutions and wars and depressions and migrations, but all of those things mean more to us when we connect in some way, in some personal way to it, and we can register the emotions of people in the past as they went through those experiences. So that's, in a way, what I'm trying to use family history as a way to, as a different kind of window into the past. And I'm not the only one doing it by any means, but I think many other people are doing it as well. But I hope this book, partly because of its scale, it does attempt to try and look at things in the long term, will encourage people to look at the past, their own pasts, in the same way.